Welcome back to Just Read It, MCKay.
I'm C.
And I'm Kay. We have officially closed one chapter of our journey and are opening the gates to a brand new world. Today we're kicking off our deep dive into House of Earth and Blood, the first book in the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And if you've been with us through Prythian, thank you for coming along for another adventure. It's time to say goodbye to the courts for now and hello to the bustling streets of Lunathian, a city where the magic is modern, the world is massive, and the first 100 pages might have you wondering if you accidentally skipped a chapter. Don't worry, we promise you didn't. Hold on. Grab your drinks, your snacks, and maybe a notebook because Sarah J. Maas has once again decided that names, places, history, politics, and emotional trauma should all be introduced before Chapter 3. We'll do our best to keep up and hopefully help you keep up too. Let's head into Crescent City.
Woo! That's perfect.
Okay, I love that.
That was perfect.
Out of breath.
That was a lot, but it was perfect. Okay, we are in a completely different world, a lot to unpack. So we are discussing the first 7 chapters in the first Crescent City book, A House of Earth and Blood. I don't even know where to start. There is so much to the beginning. There is so much in this whole series. I mean, the book is bigger than all of the ACOTAR books individually. There are more words on the pages in these books than there are in the ACOTAR books. So there's a lot. So we are introduced to an entirely new world set with all new characters that we have not met before, as far as we know. Some things are similar, some things are not, other things are crazy different. So let's just break it down as much as we can. So in this world, we have another world similar to the other ones where we have fae, humans, but we also have other types of beings. So in Throne of Glass, we have some very specific types. People, species. We have very specific species. We have humans, we have fae, we have witches, we have Vogue, which is not from that world, it's from a different world, but that's pretty much it. And the fae in that world can shift into a different form. So for instance, we have multiple fae that shift into different birds or different wolf types, different cat types. Those are primarily the different types that we see throughout that series. We don't know if we get fae who shift into horses or mice or other weird creatures, whereas in this book we have shifters that shift into pretty much every type of animal. In ACOTAR, we had humans and fae, and there were just different types of fae, but they were all under the fae branch. In Crescent City, we have the humans and the veneer. And the veneer encompass all the different species that aren't human or normal animal.
Aren't they pureblood, though? I feel like just reading through it this time, it made me just think that, because that's the way that Bryce was describing them.
So
she doesn't consider herself, right?
Yes, but I think that's an instance where we've talked about an ACOTAR where someone was using specific terms to determine whether they think they're part of that species or not. Because veneer, the term is described as all magical non-human beings. So it does technically include Bryce, even if she doesn't feel that because she's half human, half fae. But veneer itself encompasses every being. So in this world, we have everything from shifters, where they can have 2 different forms, whether it's cat, dog, bird. I mean, we got some snake-like shifters, not quite shifters, but they're actual snake people. We have humans, witches, angels, fae, elementals, sprites, mer people, water beasts, nymphs, kelpies, nokes, whatever that is, demonaki. reapers, wraiths, vampires, dragons, necromancers, and many others. So that is just a rough idea of the different types of Vanir we have in Midgard, which is the world that Crescent City is in. In Midgard, all of these different types of species belong to one of four different houses. So we have the House of Earth and Blood, which is the name of this first book. This is for shifters, humans, witches, ordinary animals, and many others to whom Chthona, which is one of our gods, who Chthona calls, as well as some chosen by Luna, who is our second god. Then we have the House of Sky and Breath. This is going to be your Malachim, which is the angels, fae, elementals, sprites, and those who are blessed by Solus, who is our third god, along with some who are also favored by Luna. Now we have a little asterisk for this house because it does talk about the sprites being included in this house. However, the sprites were kicked out of their house as a result of their participation in the Fall, which was essentially a rebellion that took place about 200 years ago. So because of that, they are now considered lowers, though many of them refuse to accept that. Then we have the House of Many Waters. This is where the river spirits, myrrh, water beasts, nymphs, kelpies, and the Nox, and others watched over by Ogenis, which is our fourth god. And then we have our final house, which is the House of Flame and Shadow. This includes reapers, wraiths, vampires, dragons, necromancers, daemonaki, and many wicked and unnamed things that even Urd herself cannot see. So Urd is our fifth god. So those are the five main gods over Midgard that are considered gods in this series. We got many different gods in Throne of Glass, just depending on the different people. We got no gods, absolutely none, in ACOTAR. And now we only have 5 gods so far in Crescent City. So Bryce herself is a half fae, half human woman. She is 23 years old. She technically belongs to the House of Sky and Breath, and that was only because she was essentially forced to. It was part of the bargain she made with her father. If she was going to become a citizen of Lunathian, which her father had to petition for her to become a citizen, that's the only way he would do it, is if she agreed to be officially a part of the House of Sky and Breath, which is where most of the Fae belong. So Bryce herself, she has the pointed ears of the Fae. She has wine red hair. She is a voluptuous woman, so she has lots of curves. She's not itty bitty like Aelin and Farah. She has more of a figure. Her best friend is Danica Fendir. Danica is a wolf shifter. She is on the thinner side, but she is all muscle, very similar to Aelin and Farah later on in the books. But Danica is the alpha of her wolf pack. Her wolf pack is called the Pack of Devils. She and Bryce have been best friends since they first roomed together freshman year in college. So this entire world is very similar to the world we live in now as far as the technological advances, but there is still magic. So it is a combination of technology, science, and magic. So Bryce and Danica both went to college together in the city of Lunathian, and they became best friends pretty much immediately. Danica also happens to be the granddaughter of the Prime. The Prime is the head guy in charge of all of the wolves for Lunathian and kind of this territory. He is the alpha of all the wolves for this area. Danica and Bryce have been through a lot together, so their friendship has grown because of everything that they've gone through. We'll get into a little bit more of their relationship in a couple minutes. Bryce currently works at a antiquities shop. So it is called Griffin Antiquities. She's worked there for about the last year. This antiquity shop is owned and run by Jessica Roga. Jessica is a 400-year-old enchantress who'd been born a witch and defected, and she had joined the House of Flame and Shadow and now answered only to the Underking himself. The witches are initially from the House of Earth and Blood. So Jessica defected from being a witch and then joined the house. She switched over to the House of Flame and Shadow. The House of Flame and Shadow is ruled by the Underking, who is also the one in charge of the Bone Quarter. Lunathian is broken into different groups and different sections, and each group that lives primarily in that section has their own leader or person in charge. So the Umber King is the one in charge of the Bone Quarter, which is also the City of the Dead kind of area. The antiquities shop where Bryce works has a combination of spell work that keeps it operational, as well as preserves the many books that are in the archives, as well as protects from outside forces. It also has technological advances in it. So there are cameras, and there are locks on all of the doors. There are no windows in this space whatsoever. So the only way to get in is to either have a key, have the handle keyed to you. So it's kind of like a handprint to open it, or be let in. Those are the only ways to actually make it into this antiquity shop. And we're going to find out why in the later chapters, but it is essentially because of the amount of nice old stuff that some fae and other beings pay a lot of money for. And so that's one thing that Bryce does, is she facilitates the sale of different pieces, different ancient artifacts, that kind of thing. She also helps to find different artifacts if they go missing. And she also kind of takes care of the space when Jessica isn't there. But it's essentially just the two of them who work here, other than the guarders of the books. So we have two in the basement, which is where the archives are. And we have a chimera, which is kind of like a small lion/dog thing that we're going to get description of later in the book. And then Lahaba is a fire sprite who lives completely in the archives, does not leave the archives. It is her job to protect all of the books, which is interesting that a fire spirit is the one guarding books. But the books are spelled to stay on the bookshelves for the most part, but there are also other spells throughout the entire archive space to keep anything from burning and all of that.
So I'm going to throw this out there since we're kind of getting into it. During my first read of this book, I hadn't been part of the Sarah J. Maas world at all. So going through, hearing her talk about the books later on and describing it, I was like, oh, it'd be so cool to walk through that and learn the history of the world. Now, after reading the other series and knowing there's something somewhere connected, but still not knowing what it is because I haven't read that far, I'm like, now I really want to go in there and just walk through and look at everything and read all of that. I was sitting there and I thought back listening and I was like, I remember thinking, I think we were sitting where it was snowing one day. And I remember sitting there thinking that would be so cool to walk through and see all of the it's described so well. It's such a heavy chapter, but the description of everything just had me being like, I want to go walk through all of it and just be there.
And we don't even get
days.
crazy descriptions on the archives yet.
But even just in the beginning, it's so, I'm telling you.
Oh, there's more.
The descriptions in this book.
I knew that was coming. I could see the look on your face that there was more that you were just trying to be quiet.
Right? I'm glad you mention it now, but we're going to talk about it again later.
Who's shocked?
Right? Oh, before we go on, I need to know, how much information do you want me to give versus how much do you not want me to give? Because when we went through ACOTAR, anything that was going to relate to something coming, I'd bring it up then and again once we got there. But since you guys haven't actually read all of Crescent City, I don't want to spoil things. So I figured if there's anything that's going to hint at something, I will just say foreshadowing and we'll leave it at that. If that's okay. Do you want me to even not say that?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I really just want to be like punched in the face with it when I read it. So I don't think I
Like-
want to know.
I have to second that. Going back to our Throne of Glass conversations of the no way. Like I would rather get some of those actually.
Okay.
Real
So
reaction.
then this deep dive is going to be a little different than it was when we did ACOTAR, because in ACOTAR we talked about future things and foreshadowing and different things that we were going to see that were going to tie into what we were reading at that point. Whereas this go around, I will try very hard not to include spoilers, since the two of you have not read through the entire series. I will only say something if I know that you guys at least have a hint of what's coming, or if it stays within book one. We'll put it that way.
You just have to make sure and like put a pin in it so we know to come back to it later.
Right? Yeah, I know. We're going to have this whole book's going to be filled with pins. Okay, so we have Bryce, Danica, Jessica. There are multiple members in Danica's pack. Her second is Connor Holstrom, which we get to see just a little bit. He is kind of like Bryce's what if. Then we have Natalie, who is Danica's third. We have Thorn, who is the Omega in the pack. Not that we get a whole lot of information as to what that means for this series, at least not yet. Bryce kind of describes them as they orbit each other, kind of hinting that there may have been a future relationship between them, but we don't know for sure. And then we have the twins, Zach and Zelda, both Snow White, but we do have a set of twins. They are considered the ghosts. And there is one more. Bronson is the other one.
Yeah.
Danica, Connor, Natalie, Thorn, Bronson, Zach, and Zelda. Those are the 7 members of her pack. They are kind of the top of the food chain in regards to the wolves in Crescent City. Okay, so it's 5 years ago that they were freshmen in Crescent City University, CCU. So those are some of our main characters, or some of our characters so far. So the book starts out with Danica visiting Bryce at work. Danica has come from a patrol because that is one part of Danica's job, is patrolling the city and protecting certain areas. She has come to shower at the archives and borrow some clothes from Bryce because she has a meeting with the heads of the city to discuss a human criminal who has been behind bars and is now most likely being set free on under a technicality. Bryce and Danica. We have some mention of Bryce and a tattoo that she had recently been talked into getting by Danica. They had gone the night before to get them. Bryce had gotten a fairly large back tattoo from the sounds of it, whereas Danica had gotten a smaller tattoo, but it was a matching tattoo. Danica's is already healed because of the benefits of being full-blooded Vanir, whereas Bryce being half human, she is still healing from the tattoo. But they got drunk the night before and went out and got matching tattoos. Danica's mother is Sabine. We do not like Sabine. She is a total B word. She is the daughter of the prime of the Valbaran wolves, which Valbaran is like the continent. This little continent that they live on is Valbara. So the prime is over all of the wolves in Valbara. So Sabine is Danica's mom. She is the alpha of the Scythe Moon Pack, who is the chief among the shifter units in the city's auxiliary. So each area of the city that has a head of the household, a head who's in charge, also has a piece of like the police force for the city, and that's called the auxiliary. And so each different species has a group that is in the auxiliary, just depends on where you rank in that auxiliary. So Danica and her pack, as well as Sabine and her pack, are at the top of that hierarchy for the auxiliary, the police. Sabine is the prime apparent, as in she is the next person in line for the prime's spot. Danica then would be the next one in line, but because the amount of power Danica has, there are whisperings that she should be the next in line and not her mother, which is probably why her mother seriously dislikes her, because her mother comes off as a very jealous woman. And because of Danica's power, the Prime, her grandfather, actually gave the heirloom sword of their family's house to Danica, bypassing Sabine. So Sabine is also very upset that she doesn't have this sword either. But the Prime said that because the blade called to Danica on her 18th birthday, that was the reason he gave for giving it to Danica instead of to Sabine when he passed. We have some discussion between Danica and Bryce about this human who is being set free. His name is Philip Briggs. Most of the time he just gets referred to as Briggs. He is a rebel, or is trying to start a rebel movement on the continent of Valbara, specifically in the city of Lunathian, because there is already a rebel movement happening in Pangira, which is the continent above, like northward of Valbara. Pangira is where the Eternal City is. That is who our rulers of the whole world live, as well as some other things that are up on that continent that we'll get to later on. But there is already a very large rebellion and war that's been happening, but it's been going on for a while. The reason he is in jail is because he has bombed multiple areas, killed lots of people in an attempt to get a rebellion to start in Lunathian and Valbara. However, he has not succeeded yet. That is why he is in jail, but he is being set free on a technicality. The reason the humans are rebelling is because they are oppressed. Very similar to what we saw in both Throne of Glass and ACOTAR. The Fae kind of come in, take over, and then make the humans their slaves, their manual laborers, their sex workers, that kind of thing. That's what the humans are good for. So just like in this book, we have a definite difference in hierarchy, society-wise, between the Vanir and the humans. And the humans are at the bottom of the hierarchy. Okay, so in Crescent City, the actual city, there is one governor over the entire city, over this entire little continent territory, and that is Micah Domitus. And he is an archangel. So he is on the angel hierarchy, and he is kind of at the top. He reports directly to the Asteri, who are in charge of the entire world. They rule the entire world. Under Micah are the 7 heads of the city, and so that's each area in the city. It has its own leader. So the areas in the city are broken up based on essentially what lives in that space. So Micah, the Archangel of Crescent City, he is also over the central business district. So he rules over all Valbara, this continent, but he is also specifically over the central business district, which is known as CBD, the central business district. So we have that. And the city, Crescent City, Lunathian, is a big circle. The central business district is on the left side or the west side of it. And then we have the Prime of the Wolves controls Moonwood, which is opposite side of the city, the eastern side. Then we have the Fae Autumn King in 5 Roses. So we have a Fae who is called the Autumn King, which we've seen before. His description is also eerily similar to the Autumn Court in ACOTAR. But he is in 5 Roses, which is directly north of Moonwood. Then we have the Underking over the Bone Quarter. The Underking is also the leader of the House of Flame and Shadow. He is like the southern third of the city is taken up by the Bone Quarter and the Istris River. You have the Viper Queen, rules the meat market. The meat market is directly south of the CBD, the Central Business District, so southwest. And then we have the Old Square, which is the center, the very center of the city, kind of center north a little bit, or the head of that space is the Oracle. And then you have the River Queen. She represents the House of Many Waters and her blue court far below or far beneath the Istros River's turquoise surface. We have the Istros River that runs through Lunathian Crescent City. The Bone Quarter is the south side of that river, and the rest of Crescent City Lunathian is on the northern side of that river. And then there is also Asphodel Meadows. This is where all the humans live, primarily where they live, where they work, but there is no head for the humans that is a part of the council like all the other heads for the different areas. So that is just another way that the humans are oppressed in this world, is that they don't have a lot of rules or laws that support them, and they don't have a lot of people in the government who support them either. But we'll get more into that later on. Okay. After Danica showered, they take a stroll through the city. Bryce is on the hunt to find Luna's horn. What we find out in this set of chapters is Luna's horn is a magical object that was from the Fae. It's part of their ancestry. However, it no longer has any magic, and therefore it was located in Luna's temple. But a week ago, there was a blackout throughout the city, and during the blackout, the horn was stolen, and it has not been seen since. So Jessica, Bryce's boss, has asked her to attempt to find the horn. So Bryce is leaving the antiquity shop to try and find the horn or find out any information that she can on it. Danica is leaving because she has to go meet with the other heads of the city to discuss Briggs being let out. So as they are walking through the city, they're chit-chatting a little bit about the horn. I think it's interesting that Danica tells her not to dig into it too much. She says, make it look like you're looking into it a little bit, and then tell Jessica that you couldn't find it and move on from there. So she does try and kind of push Bryce away from looking for the horn. As they are walking through, they do decide to go up to the gates. So we just talked about the layout of the city. In each section of the city that we just talked about, there is a gate. So there are 7 gates total, 1 in the center, and then 6 around the outside. So they come up to the gate in the old square. This is called the Heart Gate because it is in the heart of the city. So there are 7 in this city, all carved from enormous blocks of quartz hewn from the Laconian mountains to the north. So the map that we actually get in these books is only on Crescent City, only on the city. We don't get a map of the full world or the other continents, but she does give us descriptions on roughly where they're located that we can kind of piece one together. But we have some mountains in the north. So the old square is where the Heart Gate is. Because it's located in the center of Lunathian, with the other 6 gates located equal distance from it, each one opening onto a road out of the walled city. So they do walk up to it. There is a line of people waiting to go up to the city go up to the gate. Because the neat thing about the gate is that when you stand at one of them and you put a little bit of power into it, you can actually speak to someone at another one of the gates. You can be heard. So this was originally created to be able to talk to the different sections of the city when they were being patrolled and that kind of thing. If something was happening and they needed to get a message to another area, they used the gates to do that. However, technology has grown so much that now everybody has a cell phone in this world. So there is no longer a need for these gates. So because there is no longer a need for them, they have now become a tourist attraction. That it is just so neat to be able to come to these things and see a piece of history is essentially why people are coming. So what happens is you step up to the gate, the archway, which is just a large archway. There is a pedestal of quartz about 4 feet off the ground that kind of juts off beside the archway. And on that pedestal is a solid gold disc in the center. That's what you put your hand on to put the magic into the gate. And then around it are 7 different gems, and each one represents the different gate with an insignia for each district etched beneath it. So we have the emerald and a rose for 5 roses, which is where the Fae are. And we talked about it in ACOTAR, whose gem and coloring is an emerald, the King of Hybern. His dais was made out of a very large green emerald, and his banner is a emerald background. So, not sure there's a connection there, but the Fae in Crescent City are the green emerald, and roses are their symbol. And we talked about Hybern being a green emerald and Tamlin's Spring Court having a crap ton of roses in it. For the CBD, what's that?
I said speculation.
I did not say foreshadowing. I didn't say anything.
It's an interesting thought, though.
It is.
I was thinking about the Autumn King. So,
right? Considering the
Suspicious.
King of the Fae is called the Autumn King, and he has red hair. And we just saw the Autumn Court with Baron and Lucian and Eris and all of his brood all have red hair. And we even find out that fire magic is a common magic type with the Fae from the Autumn King. Not specifically the type of magic that the Autumn King's son, the Crown Prince, has, but we'll get to him in a little bit. But yes, it's very interesting. Feel like it might tie in a little bit, but who knows? Okay, the CBD is represented by an opal, so a white stone with a pair of wings, obviously, because this is for the angel, a ruby and a heart for the old square, which is the heart gate. That makes sense. The sapphire and an oak tree for moonwood. Amethyst and a human hand for asphodel meadows. Tiger's eye and a serpent for the meat market. And onyx, so black it gobbled the light, and a skull and crossbones for the bone court. They step up to the gate. I think it's interesting because Bryce or the narrator, because this series, unlike ACOTAR, there is a narrator narrating through this book instead of it actually being from one person's perspective. So I think it's interesting that the narrator mentions that there is a superstition that grew in regards to the gates, claiming that they could make wishes come true. And that to give over a droplet of your power was to make an offering to one of the 5 gods. So the gate started out as a communication system. Then a rumor came. And now people think that they can actually grant wishes. So what tourists come to do is they come to give over a little bit of power to the gate in an attempt to get a wish. It's like wishing upon a star kind of thing. But they're actually giving a little bit of their power to do it for those of them who have power. And then most people talk through the gate so that they can hear it in other areas. So Bryce and Danica walk up to the gate. I think it's pretty funny that as soon as they do, they hear somebody from another gate say titties. Because, I mean,
My favorite part.
right? It cracks you up because that is teenagers right there. What else are you going to say to a gate that someone else is going to hear you and you don't know who that is?
Everything else would be on that list.
Right? So Danica says, I've got too many things to wish for, but I will wish for her friend to win his Sunball tournament. Let me pause. Let's talk about that real quick. So we have never actually gotten a sport or any type of sporting event in the other two series, but we do have a sporting event in Crescent City series called Sunball, which is, from what I can understand, is like rugby or football, maybe soccer, something along those lines. But it is called Sunball, and we have one additional character who plays Sunball because he is still in college at the Crescent City University. His name is Ethan. He is Connor Holstom's younger brother. He's not officially a pack member for the Pack of Devils, but he is kind of like an honorary member. When he comes of age, it's just assumed that he will join their. So Danica wishes for him to win his Sunball game later that day. Bryce jokes around and says that she wishes Danica would get her manicure fixed because her nails are chipped. That is what she wishes for. But in this scene, we get a little bit more information on one of the major things that happens to all magical beings in this world. And that is they make the drop. So they get to a certain age. I think they have to be at least 18. Maybe it's 21. You have to reach a certain age to be able to take the and that means that they plunge down into their mature power, encounter whatever lays at the bottom of their souls, and then race back up to life before the lack of oxygen renders them brain dead or just plain dead. So it is essentially an internal task that they do inside themselves, but it has to be done with an anchor, someone to anchor you to this world so that when you dive down into yourself, you have that tether to someone to be able to come back up. So Danica and Bryce both have not made the drop, as they call it. When you make the drop, afterwards, if you survive it, your immortality as a veneer is kind of set in stone. So the veneers still age, but compared to humans, they age very slowly. Because for the Fae, they could live to be about 1,000 years is the average for Fae. For shifters and witches, it's usually about 5 centuries. And then for the angels, it's somewhere in between. Humans obviously don't make the drop because it requires magic and they don't have it. And that once you make the drop, you will stay looking the way you are when you made the drop for a very long time. And Bryce and Danica have both planned to do it together with those from the Pack of Devils as their anchors, and they've decided that 27 is the perfect age to do the drop. So they're both 23. They have 5 more years before they're even going to discuss doing the drop. We do get some info in regards to how much power Bryce and Danica are looking to gain when they make the drop. Because after you make the drop, then you have access to your full powers, your full mature power. Bryce will inherit barely enough power to do cool party tricks because she is half human, half. Danica was expected to claim a sea of power that would put her ranking far past Sabine's, her mother, likely equal to that of the Fae royalty, maybe even beyond Autumn King himself. Foreshadowing! As the narrator does mention that Danica has the potential to be the alpha of all wolves, not just Felbara or the Prime, but of all wolves in this entire world because of how much power she is set to gain when she makes the drop. She already has a crazy amount of power, but she will gain even more when she takes the drop. As they are still walking through, there are a couple other things that they kind of talk about and touch on as they're walking through the city. So one of them is a pendant that Bryce wears. It is an Archesian amulet, barely the size of her thumbnail, but it was gifted to her by Jessica on her first day of work. Danica calls it a hazmat suit in a necklace. So it is essentially a crazy protective talisman that Bryce wears, to the point where it costs a lot more than Bryce's salary with the antiquity. And it is a tiny gold pendant, a knot of 3 entwined circles. 3 circles. Where else have we seen 3 circles? And it was given to her by a witch. Technically, she's a sorceress now, but she was a witch. So, potential other
Foreshadowing.
connection, maybe. The other things that we find out is as they're talking about Briggs, there is mention of, like I said, Micah is the governor of Valbara, also the head of the CBD district. The 33rd Imperial Legion is essentially his personal army, but he also, as an archangel, has a triarch, which is like Maeve's cadre in Throne of Glass. It's like his personal guard, and it is made up of 5 people. It's made up by a couple of very strong beings. So we do find out one of them is the Umbra Mortis, is the initial name that we get. This is also Hunt Athalar, but he is Micah's personal assassin. He has the rare gift of lightning in his veins, and he can eliminate almost any threat. So we're going to get more information on him later on in this section. But we also get a picture that Bryce walks by, and it is essentially a piece of propaganda in this city. It is a poster of the Asteri, who run the entire world, and it is the 6th enthroned Asteri tacked up on a wall with an empty throne to honor their fallen sister. So we have one Asteri that is supposedly dead. That's why there is an empty throne. So instead of 7 Asteri, there are 6 that rule this world. The gates of the city are each set along a ley line running through Lunathian. What is a ley line? So a ley line, those are natural underground channels of raw matter that travel beneath the city of Lunathian. So that is why there is a gate, a city, one of these gates, the 7 gates, that is set along each of the ley lines that run through the city. And Bryce finds it interesting that there is a plaque attached to this gate that says, "The power shall always belong to those who give their lives to the city." Okay. We also find out that Bryce and Danica have an additional close friend. Her name is Fury Axt. We don't have a whole lot of information on her. In this first set of chapters, we find out she's essentially like an assassin. She has a license. She's James Bond, female James Bond. She has a license to kill in many countries. According to the angels, they don't want to mess with her. She is a merchant or a mercenary because she does things for certain people. We're going to find out later on in this set of chapters that Micah, the governor, has actually told Hunt, who is the Umbra Mortis, twice to kill Fury, and in the end, Micah rescinds that order because the fallout would be too much because of the people that Fury works for. We don't know who it is. We get some mentions. Maybe there's somebody in the Senate because there is a republic in this world that the Asteri kind of roll over, and they put the Senate in place to make decisions. But all of those decisions are still in line with the Asteri and their choices. But there is talk that Fury has worked for one of the senators cut in their world for the city head. She has enough friends high up that she is also protected. But that Fury had made the drop when she was 21. She hadn't chosen that for herself. It had just happened or had been forced on her. No one really knows. They met Fury at CCU when they were in college. However, Fury wasn't there for college. She was there on an operation. And that Fury most likely had a crap ton of money because of how good she was at her job. We then shift scenes from Bryce and Danica walking through the city to later on that day after Bryce is done working and after Danica goes to the meeting with all of the heads to talk about Brit. They are back in the apartment that Danica and Bryce actually share. There's talk about the apartment itself. It's not a great apartment. It's not in a great location, but they agree. More like Danica agreed to live in a not nice place because this was the best that Bryce could afford, and Bryce wanted to pay her house. So it's not a great apartment. It does have a door that opens, the exterior door for the building opens with a code, and then there are keys to the actual apartments. There's only 2 apartments on each floor, but the landlord hasn't replaced a lot of the cameras. They're not up to code as far as what the government requires for buildings like this. So we're going to find out at the end of these chapters that none of that has been upgraded in a long time. So it's definitely not the most up-to-date build. That this night is the pack night for the pack of devils. That Danica and her entire pack is in the apartment spending time together because it's something that the pack has to do. It's mandatory pack night once a week, and it is the one night off that they get from patrolling, policing the city. Bryce is coming home to the entire pack, peeing in her living room, commandeering her TV and all of the seating. She does mention that the pack is very nosy. Everybody's in each other's business, which is very much like the inner circle in ACOTAR. But Bryce does mention that she sometimes felt bad for Danica's future mate, whoever that would be. The poor man wouldn't know what hit him when he found himself bound to her, unless he was wolfkind himself and kind of understood pack life. She mentions that Bryce and Danica both would prefer not to be with a wolf, and we find out in a little bit that is because the wolves are territorial with their female. Very similar type of posturing that we've seen from other very strong males in the other Sarah J. Maas world. Bryce likes to call them alpha holes, which I feel like is something Aelin has called them, or something very similar that Aelin has called Rowan and Adian in the past. Bryce also calls Connor in alpha hole. She calls Danica in alpha hole. They're pretty much, she uses the term for those who feel that they need to be overprotective with their mates or the people in their life. So the entire pack of devils is in their living room, like I mentioned. Ethan, Connor's younger brother, is not there. He did win his Sunball tournament, but he is actually partying with his teammates instead because he's not an official member of the pack. We do get a little hint of some of the restrictions in this world. So Danica isn't giving Bryce a whole lot of information after she gets home in regards to what happened at the meeting with Briggs. But Danica is kind of saying to Bryce, well, what's the point in complaining about my job? No, Danica says there's no choice in joining the auxiliary, which is the police group for them, because all predator-born shifters were destined for certain ox packs before they were even born. So if you were born into any one of the predator shifters, you have to be a part of a pack that is a part of the police force. And we're going to find out that that's very similar in other areas, the different species as well. So they're very strict. You have to do certain things. But Danica does tell us that no matter what they tried, they couldn't find a way to actually hold Briggs, so they did have to let him go free. However, Sabine had ordered her entire Scythe Moon pack to watch him tonight, along with some of the 33rd, which we talked about. The 33rd Imperial is over, that's Micah's personal army, over the sea. And Bryce can tell that there's something Danica isn't telling her. She isn't sure what, but Danica just kind of brushes it off. Danica does mention that there were also 2 CCU, Crescent City University students, who were killed near Luna's temple last week during the blackout. And Danica found this out from Sabine, who kind of broadcasted it to make her daughter look bad because it happened on Danica's watch. They don't know who killed them. In fact, it took them a while to actually identify them because they were shredded apart and partially eaten by whatever had attacked. Danica does mention, as they're chowing down on some pizza, that doesn't Bryce have a date tonight? And Bryce realizes that, crap, yes, she does. She has a date in an hour. We find out that Bryce, because she has such an aversion to alpha holes, as she likes to call them, she selects humans to date because they don't really know what to do with her. So they're not going to force her into a mold, which is what she's seen other alpha type males do to other females. So that's why she specifically chooses humans, because she can overpower them. So she is specifically dating Reed Redner. And Reed is part of a family. Very few human families have money, status in the social hierarchy. Reed is part of one of the few families who does have this. He and his family own a technology company that kind of has its hands in quite a bit of things. Oh, a massive human-owned magic tech. So they combine magic and technology in the central business district. His family started Redner Industries. It does, like I said, it is magic tech. And Danica is actually the one who set them up, because Danica does some part-time security work for Redner Industries. Danica does it because she makes a little extra money doing it. Also annoys her mother, so it's just an extra reason to do it. And we're going to find out later on that there are additional reasons why she has that connection to Redner Industries, but that's all we get at this point. So it is because Danica set them up that Bryce is now dating him. They've only been dating for about 2 months. Reed has a ton of, but Bryce doesn't really care to date him. They don't have the best relationship. They're both super busy, and the sex is not that great. She gets dressed up, but she doesn't put on a whole lot of makeup to go out to this date. She does put on a very skin tight gray dress that has a nice high slit up the lip. Her red colored lipstick, which I think is why she reminds me of Moore, because red is one of her colors. Red lipstick, red hair, and Moore wears red all of the time. So I think that's why I connect the two of them. We do find out that the reason why Bryce does not like alpha type males is because that's how her Fae father is. We don't know exactly who he is yet in this set of chapters. We are going to find out soon. But as of right now, we just know he is a full Fae, and that her mother, Ember, at 19, had been pursued by her Fae father. Pursued, seduced, and then tried to keep her, and gone so far into possessive territory that the moment Ember had realized that she was carrying Bryce, that she ran before he could scent it and lock her up in his villa. So that is why Bryce does not like possessive males. So that is exactly why she has not agreed to go on a date with Danica's second, Connor, who has been pretty much in love with her for the last 5 since she and Bryce met in college. Connor does ask her, just let me take you out on one date, even if it's just a trial date to see how it goes, just let me take you on that. Bryce kind of goes out of her way to try and pick a fight with him so that he doesn't quite get to ask her, but he does, because she doesn't want to. She doesn't want to say no again, essentially, which is also why it makes me think of. She leaves. Danica tells her, light it up, because that is their little saying. Bryce says, light it up back. And then Danica replies with, love you. And then we get a little paragraph explaining that this was something Danica didn't say very often, and that it took Danica a while to actually say those words to Bryce, that Bryce said it often because she explains to Danica that in her world, if you didn't say it often when you were leaving or saying goodbye to someone, you didn't know if that was going to be the last time. And I think it's really interesting that we get that. And Danica says it and Bryce doesn't say it back. And that is the last time that Bryce sees Danica before Danica dies. But Bryce does go to her date with Reed. Along her walk there, we do get some additional information in regards to the world. The only major thing that I'm going to point out before we get to the date is she's talking about the Malachim, which are the angels and their wings, mentioning, because she's walking past a couple of bored-looking patrol of angels, mentioning that to touch an angel's wings without permission meant that you were lucky if you only lost a hand. Which I think is funny because we talked about that in ACOTAR as well. With the Illyrians, you don't touch their wings, you ask for. So very similar when it comes to the different winged beings in each. So Bryce does go to a very upscale restaurant to meet Reed. It is called the Pearl and Rose. Before she leaves, Danica actually bets her that the bouncers won't let her walk in. She is too scandalously dressed, and so they're not sure if she'll be let in. However, she walks right up the steps. Now they're bouncers as any. But she does get glared at and growled at and sneered at by all the other people around her. Reed is late by 45 minutes. As she is waiting, again, we get some narration on different information in this world. So we do get a description of the time frames or the time, like the year in this world, which is not something we've ever gotten before. We didn't get it in Throne of Glass, nor did we get it in ACOTAR as far as what year in the world we're on. We get it when the four houses of Midgard are described to us, that the four houses are decreed as of 33 VE. And VE stands for Vanir era. So we get a very, very brief overview of how the Fae came to Midgard, to this world. That they came through a rift called the Northern Rift, like a rip in the. They'd come through the rift, overtaken Midgard eons ago, and now they identify their calendar system by HE, which is the human era before the Vanir, and then VE, which is after the Vanir. So that's how they determine what year it is. So now we are at some point in the Vanir, because Bryce is wondering what it would have been like before the Vanir came. And I think it's interesting because this is a world where humans were first, and then the Vanir came. And we also get some description in the very first ACOTAR book where Feyre is going through Tamlin's study and notices the murals on the wall, and they talk about how the world was made. And that it shows that there were no humans there initially. So it almost sounds like the Fae was there on that world first, and then the humans came, whereas it's the opposite on this world. The humans were there first, and then the Vanir, or the different magical beings. Whereas we don't get that information in Throne of Glass. Okay, so finally Reed shows up 45 minutes late. At this point, Bryce has drank quite a bit of wine, expensive wine, because he can afford it, and he's made her wait. We do get a little bit of information in regards to the Asteri and the rebellion that is happening. That the human resistance was prepared to wipe themselves out rather than submit to the Asteri and their elected Senate and its rule. And for 40 years now, the war had raged in the vast Pangeran territory, wreaking havoc on wrecking cities, creeping towards the stormy. And so they're talking about, since Pangaea is up above them, there's a chance that the rebellion will come across that little sea that's in between Pangaea and Valbara. That is why Briggs is trying to start a rebellion in Lunathian and on Valbara, because at this point the humans have been in essentially like in near slavery for 15,000 years. That's how long the Vanir have been here. And the humans have been in close to slavery the entire time. They've either been food, prey, or sex work. And so it makes sense that they are trying to rebel because they've been oppressed for 15,000 years. Even while on the date, Reed is paying attention to his phone. However, when Bryce gets a text message, he gets annoyed when she looks at her phone. So it's very one-sided. And it gets to the point where Bryce gets up and walks out. She's not interested in dating him anymore. The mediocre sex is not enough to keep her in this relationship. So she leaves. She kind of stirs up a little bit of trouble with some others who were sneering at her in the dining area. But she does end up leaving with a bottle of very expensive wine. And then when she gets out there, she knows she can't call Danica because Danica's doing her pack night. She's not going to leave the pack. And Bryce doesn't want the pack to come to her. So she wants to go out and party and have some fun. So she calls up Fury, which is one of her other close friends we already mentioned, to kind of hang out with her. She goes off and buys some mirth root, which is a type of drug that they can smoke. Fury meets her at one of their favorite bars. But I think it's interesting because Bryce calls her and Fury tells her she's in the Five Roses, which is where the Fae are primarily located in Crescent City. And Fury says she can come, but she needs to finish up a job first. So makes you wonder what kind of job she's doing. And that's when she goes off and buys some drugs. She also calls Juniper, who is their other friend in their 4-person square. And Juniper is a ballerina. She is also a fawn species. So she does look humanoid from the waist up, and then she has horse-like legs ending in hooves. But she is an actual ballerina, and she is the very first fawn ballerina to actually have a job and perform on the main Crescent City Ballet. Juniper is also kind of the anchor in Bryce's life in regards to she's going to be the nicer, she reminds me a lot of Elaine. She really does, because she just seems like she's super nice, super sweet. She's all about the dancing when they come to the club. She doesn't do any drugs. She doesn't drink because she has a performance the next morning. So she's really just there to dance and spend time with her. But while Bryce is buying her own drugs, she does mention that the female she's buying them from was trying to sell her a new party drug called Synth that will make you feel like a god. So we are going to see Synth pop up later on in this, but that is our first mention of it. As Bryce is waiting for Fury and Juniper to get there, she does agree to go on a date with Connor. So she texts him back that we can meet on Saturday, get pizza at 6. If you're late, it's over. He is super cute. Tells him, I'll never make you wait. You looked delicious when you left the apartment early. Yada, yada. So super sweet, and he's very excited to finally get to date. Too bad it's not actually going. She's also texting Danica through all of this. What are you laughing at?
Your delivery was just so meh. It won't happen. We're good. Let's move on.
No. The first time
Like,
I
it was
read
just-
this, I was so torn up, and she was like, "It's not even that big of a deal."
I
And I
was
was
so
like,
heartbroken
"What
for
do
poor
you
Connor.
mean?" And then I was like, "Wait, this is like being super upset over Tamlin, isn't it?" And she's like, "Yep." And I was like, "No."
I wouldn't say it's quite to that level, but
Oh, well,
No,
that's
and
what we
I
compared it to.
I would change my answer to this is like everybody who loves Sam Cortland from Throne of Glass, who's
Yeah.
Aelin's first love. I can't stand him. I can't stand him. I am so
I
glad
wasn't a
he died
Sam fan.
because I'm a Rowan fan. And I don't particularly love Hunt in the book, so I don't have a preference for him or Connor. I feel like the first 7 chapters are like the prequel. Just like Assassin's Blade is the prequel. They're just there to set the stage.
It was still devastating, though. I cried that first time. Yeah.
I was so,
He is
because he was so
super
cute
sweet.
about it. He's all, yeah, it's been going on
Right,
forever.
and
like, I've
you
gone
want
around
to
this.
like
Yay.
him. I just feel like there wasn't enough time for me to get emotionally invested in him.
But
that was because I was trying to read really fast just to get through the book.
I was
there they
still
go.
super surprised, though. Even I already, this was the 3rd series, and I wasn't expecting it. It was still, bam, out of nowhere.
Well, especially coming after ACOTAR, because like nothing happens in the first like 4 chapters of
Yeah.
ACOTAR, and then all of a sudden you get a little something. Tam Tam comes, but then we get a whole bunch of blah in the spring. I mean,
Where
it's
this
definitely more
series-
than that, but
Hey, you
the
get some
city
world building.
jumps us right in.
Bam! You want some world building? Oh, we'll make you love people. Haha, not the-
And now we're gonna kill them all. Not just one, but all.
I feel like our level
Man.
of seriousness has just ebbed and flowed all night.
One with the flow.
We do get some mention as Bryce is waiting for Fury to get to the club that Danica, her degree in school was history. So Danica is big on looking back into the different histories. It's why she likes coming to the archives where Bryce works, because she likes looking through all the different. And Bryce mentions that Danica had spent countless hours looking into the history of the dominant shifter packs in other cities, because she's trying to figure out how the shifter lines, like how it works, whatever power Danica has is actually a rarity, and so she's trying to figure out how she got it. And if there were any ancient bloodlines that explained it. So Danica is looking into a lot of the shifter pack's history in other cities, trying to find this. Why lions had come to rule in a city called Hilly. Why tigers ruled in a city called. Why falcons reigned in a city called.
I think if I remember, Oya, I think is
Okay.
the way they pronounce
In a
it.
city called. Whether there was a dominance that determined the prime alpha status passed through families or if it skipped around, if the non-predatory shifters could head up the city's off. They could, but it was rare. And then, honestly, most of it bored Bryce, so she didn't pay a whole lot of attention to. Darn you, Bryce. But if Danica had ever learned why the Fendir family had claimed so much of the share in the dominance pie, as Bryce likes to call it, she had never told. So Bryce is kind of ruminating on that while she's waiting for. She is texting back and forth with Danica. Danica's yelling at her for going out to have fun without her, but Danica is having pack night, so she'll just have to live with it. Oh, or die with it, you know. That was a really bad joke.
Yeah. I think I'm rubbing off on you now. That's like Emily level cynical.
I told myself I needed to be careful doing this series and not be super cynical. That's going downhill real fast.
I wasn't going to say much, but you can already see your lack of love for this series.
I'll get better at pretending. I'll get better.
Just read it, okay? Just don't die.
Okay, let's try this again. While Bryce is waiting, she is also ruminating in regards to Fury, because there is not a lot of information we get on Fury. There's not a lot that Bryce knows about Fury. All she knows is that Fury is Vanir. She's not sure what kind or what house she even belongs to. She says it wasn't polite to ask, which if Nessa was here, she would just ask right out because she already did with. She knows that Fury is a full citizen and that her skills probably means she belongs to House of Flame and Shadow, but it's not confirmed. Bryce kind of rules out the Demonaki, vampire, or even a wraith, just based on how Fury. But outside of that, she is absolutely no. But Fury is. She has long onyx hair tied in a high ponytail that brought out the sharp lines of her light brown face. She is deep set chestnut eyes, and she wears black. She wears black, you know, like so many other people in all of these. She is in black leather leggings, skin tight velvet top, and butt kicking boots. So that is about all we get from. So they go in and enjoy their time together. They smoke the mirth root. Fury has also brought a white powder drug called Light something. Light Seeker. Light Seeker. Which they snort. So they are drinking a ton, smoking, as well as snorting multiple different kinds of drugs. Juniper, like I said, is not drinking. She's not doing any of the drugs because she has stuff in the morning she has to go to. But she is dancing with Bryce. One thing that is mentioned, we get a little bit more information on the drop itself because there are people there that are celebrating a successful drop. And one thing that happens when you take the drop is that there is an amount of first light that comes out of you, which is like your magic. That comes out of you when you make the drop. There is like they bottle that first light and give a small portion of it to the person who made the drop so that they can make different things out of that first light. For instance, one of the things that they make are little glow sticks of halo, like a normal halo glow stick where you put it together for a halo. Just like that, only it is made out of first light from this girl. And so it's a small amount that then is given to all of her friends so that they all can wear these halos. Juniper joins this group of friends, ends up getting a halo herself. Bryce joins them a little bit. And I like the way Sarah words this because we've already talked in previous books, both Throne of Glass and ACOTAR, that music plays such a big part in the lives of the other main female characters. And it's the same with Bryce, that the movie, when she became the notes and rhythm and the bass, when she became song given form, that is how she is kind of letting the music out, is by dance. Like their bodies were full of sound. They could barely contain, could barely stand it, and only dance could express. She does kind of mention that even though she's going on a date with Connor in a couple of days, she's going to enjoy herself, have some fun. We do get mention of the club that they're in, that it is actually the ruins of an old temple. It is called the Raven, but it was an actual temple, or it had been. It was a building that encased the ruins, but the dance floor remained the original ancient of some long forgotten god's temple. So again, we have long forgotten gods, just like we did in and that the carved pillars throughout still stood from way back when. So on the temple walls are carvings of satyrs and fauns drinking and dancing and partying, enjoying themselves. Bryce also kind of talks about Connor and that a relationship with him was going to go far beyond the physical, which is why she hadn't taken that step with him, because mentally she wasn't prepared for it. And that she had been a coward because she wasn't ready for it, but it's why she had avoided from the moment she met him 5 years ago. And when she met him, she mentions that they just stared at each other. We do find out that she does actually have some fun, and she sleeps with somebody in the bathroom while she's high and drunk. But she does end up going home shortly afterwards. She can't remember leaving or the club. She can't remember how she got home or saying goodbye to her friends. Nothing. All she can remember is all of a sudden we're awake again and she is at the door to her building. She's trying to remember the code. It takes her a little while, but she finally. She mentions that the lights in the building were flickering. And these are so their entire technology system, all of it is powered by I'm going to call it electricity. It's actually first light, but I'm going to compare it to electricity because the first light is controlled by the Asteri and the government, just like electricity. And so you have to buy the first light for it to actually power your home, your light, your phones, your TVs. All of that is all powered by first light instead of magic or instead of electricity. It's the first light is essentially they just have an official name for it. Okay. She finally makes it up to their door. It's a very long battle for her to get there up the couple of flights of stairs. But I love how well Sarah words this because you can really feel like you're that drunk person trying to get home, trying to remember what your door code is, trying to get the key, dropping the key, trying to find it on the ground. At this point, she's taken her shoes off because she's in stilettos and they've completely mangled her feet from dancing. So she's just walking around in her bare feet. But Sarah does such a great job of describing what it is like when you're drunk trying to really do anything. So Bryce gets up to her door, does drop her keys, and then realizes that when she picks her keys up, they were actually sitting in a pile or a pool of blood, and that her door is already open. The lock had been mangled, the handle wrenched completely off, and that the door had been kind of swung open, but it also had kind of been crumbled up like a sheet of paper, which is interesting because it is an iron. There is specific call out that it is iron and it is italicized. So there is something special about iron in this world as well. Just like we've gotten in the other two worlds, that iron, it plays a this world as well. But that they had also had spells and enchantments to protect them so that people couldn't break in. So whatever had gotten into their apartment was strong enough to break those. And we get a description of a coppery of smell, which we talked about it a lot in A Court of Thorns and Roses, and then sporadically throughout the rest of the series. But that there is a coppery tang of blood and a festering odor that she can smell when she walks. And her apartment is completely trashed. Everything is shredded, including the pack of devils that are pieces of them are still throughout this. Danica is in Bryce's bedroom, again in pieces, and Connor also in pieces on the floor in front of the bed as if he was protecting. And that the heap of pieces beside the bed closest to Danica was Bryce then can hear a noise outside of the apartment, thinking that this is the attacker. Somehow it had left the apartment when it heard Bryce coming up the stairs. So she goes outside, sees that there are some sort of footprints in the trash chute going into it and then also leaving it. So assuming that the attacker had gone into the trash chute while Bryce walked into the apartment and then left the trash chute after Bryce or before Bryce could come out of the apartment. She's determined to figure out who the attacker is. And I think it's interesting because she starts running down the stairs and mentions a glowing white haze creeping over her vision, and it blazed through every inhibition, disregarded every warning bell. So we talk a little bit about like the killing calm in Throne of Glass, and something similar that Feyre goes into a couple of times. Rhys goes into a couple of times throughout ACOTAR. I'm gonna compare this to that as well. That Bryce has kind of gone into something like that because she is now so focused on finding this attacker to at least be able to ID them so that she can tell whoever she needs to that it's the one that killed Danica and the pack. So she just needs to get a glimpse of it. She doesn't want to try and kill it, just wants to ID. We did find out earlier in the set of chapters that Bryce, like, she is well trained. Even though she doesn't have a ton of power, she has some of the strength and agility that comes with being a Vanir, or at least half of it. But we also find out that her stepdad trained her very well, not just in shooting guns, but also in some hand-to-hand combat. And she dances multiple times a week to keep her body. So she is going after this creature, mentions that the creature's rotting stench is what she can smell. When she finally gets close enough to see what it looks like or catch a glimpse of it, she describes it as some feral thing with smooth, near translucent gray skin. It crawled on 4 long, spindly legs, but looked vaguely humanoid, and it was feasting on someone in an alley when she comes upon it. She realizes that it is a Malik, which is one of the, and that the maw, the mouth of this creature, ripping apart the chest of the, is clear. It had crystalline fangs that easily dug through the skin and Bryce runs up. She has, in her apartment, she grabbed the leg of the table that was torn apart and brought that with her as her only option for a weapon at the time. So she does come running up at this beast, smacks it in the head pretty hard. And so it kind of goes, it moves and is kind of thrown back a little bit. And as it whirls around, its front legs or arms actually gouge lines into the cobblestones. So it has pretty decent claws. The creature had no eyes, only smooth planes of bone above deep slits, as in its. And the blood that leaked from its temple where Bryce hit it with the table leg was clear. So it's not red blood, it's clear, which is super. She does take a very bad bite to her thigh. It kind of shreds through her thigh, does sever an artery, but Bryce does manage to hit it again, enough that it had actually potentially broken something in the demon. And so at that point, it runs away. The demon leaves. And Bryce also now she's trying to decide if she's going to stay and help the angel or if she's going to try and go after the demon that she's. However, the angel, she realizes that the wounds were bad enough that they were going to be fatal if she didn't do so. So she does go over to try and help hold the stomach in this angel and the heart, because his stomach and chest are pretty much shredded to the point where like his bones are broken, his wings are broken behind him. She does manage to get his cell phone out of his pocket and calls the emergency number, tells them roughly where she is, well, roughly where her apartment is, but she's a couple blocks from that. So she tells them, just track this phone. Any dispatcher is going to say, well, I need to know where you are. So she does find the phone number for this phone on the phone, gives it, and is screaming it to the dispatcher. And the dispatcher finally looks up whose phone number this is and is like, holy crap. Okay, they're coming. People are. Well, the phone essentially falls from her hand because she is losing blood herself and the pain taking over from her shredded thigh. But she does, before she passes out, she mention looking into the angel's gaze, that it was so full of agony, she thought it was what her soul must look like, because her soul is also being shredded because of the deaths of Danica and the pack of. As Bryce is going through all of this, there is also mention that the drugs are trying to take hold. Bryce is trying to stay even with the drugs and the alcohol in her system, long enough to actually be able to do something. There's kind of a back and forth throughout this whole section, but she is able to overcome it until and then passing from multiple things, whether it's the drugs, the alcohol, or her shredded. We don't really know. The next chapter is actually from, none of these are really from someone's perspective, but we get more. It's a little bit more from the perspective of Isaiah Tiberian. And Isaiah is the leader of Micah's Triari. And we mentioned earlier that the Triari was like the little personal guard of the governors of the archangel. Isaiah is also the commander of the 33rd, which is the army for the CBD, Micah's personal. Hunt Athalar, which is the Umbra Mortis, is also part of the Triari. We also have mentioned a Victoria, who we're going to see in a little bit. She is a Wraith. She is also part of the Triari. And then there are a couple other members of the Triari that we're going to get later on as well. So now we are from Isaiah's perspective. Bryce is in not quite a holding cell, very similar to that, and she is just sitting in a chair at a table looking at nothing, and she's been that way for a while now. She looks like death. Isaiah describes her as looking similar to soldiers who had crawled off a battlefield after fighting for long periods of time. That was the look she had in her Her gray dress was ripped. Her left thigh was gushing enough blood that he wondered if she'd faint. And when they came and found her with the she had been half wild, either from the sheer terror of what was happening, from the grief of Danica and the pack of devils dying, or from the sheer amount of drugs coursing through her system. And so it's difficult when they get there, it's very difficult to pull her away from the angel so they can attend to his wound and her. But Hunt comes up to her. Hunt had cursed up a storm as he knelt before her, and she'd bucked, nearly kicked him between the legs, but then he pulled off his helmet, looked her right in the eye, and told her to calm down. She'd fallen completely silent, just stared at Hunt, blank and hollow. She didn't so much as with each punch of the staple Hunt had pulled from the small medkit built into his battle suit. She just stared and stared and stared at the Umbra. So kind of a similar reaction she had to Connor when she first. We get a little description in regards to the relationship between Hunt and Isaiah, because at this point Hunt has walked into the room. Isaiah is monitoring Bryce as she sits. That had dark angular eyes. His hair is long enough that it kind of covers his forehead because he has a tattoo on his forehead. It matches the one that is on Isaiah's forehead as well. That they were part of a rebellion that took place 200 years ago, primarily made up of the angels. They were rebelling against the Asteri. Isaiah and Hunt were both part of that, as well as Victoria, one of the other members of the Triari that we mentioned. They were all part of the rebellion, and because of that, they were then punished with these halos that they put on their head. And they call them halos because it was a mockery of the divine auras early humans had once portrayed angels as possessing. And we just talked about another angel in another book who had a halo, at least from Ferris. So, the angels rebelled 200 years ago. They were stopped, and instead of killing all of them, they have these halos that are put onto them by the witches, and it's witch ink, so that it actually represses some of the magic that they have. So where Hunt has crazy amount of lightning power that he could level a field, very similar to Rhysand, he now only has a fraction of that. It's still a lot more than most other people, but it is a fraction of what. It is also mentioned in here that the Asteri had created the angels to be their perfect soldiers and loyal servants. The angels, gifted with such power, relished their role in the world until Shahar, which is the archangel they once called Dace, until she and Hunt and the others who were a part of Shahar's elite 18th Legion when their rebellion had failed. And so now they have the halo on their foreheads, and then they also have the stamp, the tattoo of a slave on their wrist, which is SPQ, which is, it signifies the Asteri. That's their letterhead for the Republic. The 4 letters encircled with 7 stars and adorned the wrist of every being owned by. Isaiah mentions even if he had chopped off his own arm, the limb that would grow back, which is interesting that his limb would grow back to begin with. But if it did, or when it did, it would still have the tattoo on it because that was part of the. So that was what we learn in regards to the fall or the rebellion that took place 200. So it is Hunt and Isaiah watching Bryce as she's in the other room. Isaiah picks up a folder that he has on Bryce, which I feel like is the perfect, sweet and short little little description of Bryce. Bryce Quinlan is her last name, which is actually her mother's last name. She's 23 years old, half fae, half human. She is the blood test from your say that she'll have an immortal lifespan. Her power rating is near negligible. She hasn't made the drop yet. but she is listed as full civet. She was the one found in the alley trying to keep his heart from falling out with her. They realize that she is Danica's roommate, and we find out that the 33rd calls Danica the party princess, and that there are 2 folders that Isaiah has. One is super thin, and this is Bryce's. And we find out that Bryce has done very little in her life to kind of get the party, or that she had one crime before this, and it was for public indecency. During a summer solstice parade, she got a little frisky against a wall and so she was in a holding cell overnight, paid the fine, did community service to get it wiped from her record, but that's it. And then Isaiah has another folder that is super, and this is part 1 of Danica Fendier's file, and it is part 1 of, because that is how much of a criminal history that Danica, petty theft starting from when she was 10, continues until about 5 years ago. Then it goes eerily quiet. And Isaiah says, if you ask me, it sounds like Bryce is the one who was led down the road to ruination by Danica, and then she led Danica away from it. So not a whole lot has happened in the last 5 years, thanks. Like I said, we did get mention of the Triari, that it's a 5-warrior team. Victoria is the third, so we don't know the 2 others yet. We do find out that Hunt's main goal is to actually trace and hunt demons. That is what his main job is for Micah. He also is kind of Micah's assassin, so he goes off and does other things for Micah, but that is one of the main things. Tracking down and eliminating any demons who crept through the cracks in the Northern Rift or entered this world through an illegal. So we know that demons can be into this world, or they can come through the rift if there's a crack in it. We do find out that the 33rd's infantry, led by Naomi, arrests, but there's no proof for sure that he is the one who actually led. Sabine comes barging in because she hates Bryce, saying that Bryce stole the sword, Danica's sword that was handed down from grandfather the Prime, that Bryce is a wannabe wolf and the sword should be. So she doesn't come in asking who killed her daughter. She comes in demanding to know where the sword is, so we can see where her priority. She calls Bryce a slut, wants to know what they're going to do to torture Bryce to get the information out of her, because she's convinced it could be Bryce who did it. She doesn't really care. She just wants Bryce dead because but eventually Hunt does get Sabine to leave, and then Victoria comes in an attempt to ask Bryce some questions. However, Bryce is completely checked out. We do get a little bit of information on Victoria, and she is so a wraith is a being that is able to take on an actual and then shed that body for a different body. And so Victoria, because she was part of the rebellion, her punishment is that she isn't allowed to jump into a different body to shed her current skin and find a different one. So she's been in this for the 200 years since the rebellion, and that it was starting to show that with the slow erosion of, but Victoria is still the one leading. She is just asking questions, trying to get Bryce to give them some info. One of them does mention that Bryce is on a whole shopping list worth of drugs and alcohol, that it was enough to stop a human's heart and a lesser veneer's heart too. So they're not quite sure how she, being a lesser veneer since she's half, was actually still alive. Bryce does not respond to any of the questions that Victoria asks. She's not being rude about it. She's just asking some questions, a normal voice, but Bryce is just staring at nothing. Eventually, Victoria actually pulls out her phone and goes through some of the text messages that they downloaded from Bryce's phone. Danica's phone, pack of devils, All of their phones were destroyed, and so they are unrecoverable. They do have some fuzzy footage of the demon as it's moving through the streets, but it's almost as if the demon, one, is faster than the wind, and two, it had known how to keep out of the direct lens of the cameras. So they don't have a clear shot of it. That's why they need Bryce to answer their questions. However, she does not, because she is just staring off into. Victoria plays the recording. All they have is a audio from one of the cameras inside the building that caught part of what happened. It is more or Danica being ripped apart and begging not to be ripped apart. So not a pleasant recording to have to listen to. Because of that, and because of the headspace it puts Bryce in, she kind of has a explosion, kind of a mental breakdown. She throws the table and the chairs, ends up breaking both, which is kind of crazy again with her only being half baked. Isaiah kind of attributes it to pure physical rage, an eruption of primal, and then it was difficult to halt an eruption like that. So they end up shielding themselves so that nothing happens, but as soon as Bryce flips the table and all of that, she then ends up bent over on her knees, throwing up, in her throw up, continually throwing up. And at this point, Hunt has come in because he knows, he can tell Bryce she's in shock. She can't say anything. She can't think. She's not going to be able to tell them nothing along those lines. Hunt has gone in to try and stop this because he knows they're not going to get it. But before anything crazy can happen, Naomi calls and tells them that they need to let her go because Runathian, he is the crown prince of the Fae. He is called, he is livid that no one notified the House of Sky and Breath that they were bringing the girl in, that she does not have a proper escort, and that she needs to be released immediately. And he's put enough power and weight behind that Naomi's response is let her go now. Don't ask her a single question more. Don't tail her. Definitely don't put Hunt on her tail. Just let her go. And as soon as they let her go, then we have our first glimpse at Runathian, who is my favorite character in the whole series. He most likely came in from a side door since he didn't pass Bryce on the way in, and why they didn't know he was coming. He is dark, which is odd because the Autumn King has he is a dark-haired fae with a silver hoop through his lower, raven black hair, but it is buzzed. All one whole side of his head is buzzed, and then the other side is super long black hair. He also has some other piercings. He has tattoos, essentially sleeves on both arms, wearing a leather jacket. You could tell he was Runathian, crown prince of the Valbaran Fae, son of the Autumn King, and the current possessor of the Star Sword. So we have another sword in this world, powerful enough to be mentioned. So we have Danica's sword, and now we the Star Sword, fabled dark blade of the ancient Starborn, proof of the prince's chosen status among the Fae, whatever that means, because the angels don't know. We're going to find out. It is attached to Rune's back, and it is a black hilt, devouring the glare. First, Isaiah had once heard someone say the sword was made from iridium, mined from a meteorite forged in another world before the Fae had come through the north. Then he goes on to talk about the type of magic that Rune has, that fire magic was most common among the Valbaran Fae, and that the Autumn King wielded that himself. But rumor claimed that Rune's magic was more like those of his kin, who ruled the sacred Fae Isle of across this power to summon shadows, or mist that could not only veil the physical world, but the mind as well, perhaps even telepathy.
Okay, pause. So this reminds me of Reese. Okay, so I know obviously you can't tell me anything.
It is not confirmed or not, but it is a
Okay.
theory that
Okay.
there is some
But how does that make sense though because the Autumn King part throws me off.
The theory is, and this is without spoilers for this book. So the theory is that Reese's sister that Tamlin actually spirited her to the Pull of Stars. That is apparently a portal. And she went through that, and that she is actually the wife of the Autumn, and therefore the mother. So the theory is that Rune would be Rhysand's.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. It's not confirmed. There's little to no description of Rune's mother. We do get mentioned that Rune is the head of the Fey division of the Ox, of the police. He, along with a couple of his friends, which we're going to meet them later on, they are part of the Fey version. They do ask if he knows anything the killings, because in the meeting that Danica had been to earlier that day in regards to Briggs, Rune did argue with Danica in regards to Briggs. And so that's why Isaiah is asking if Rune knew anything about it. Rune doesn't. They then ask, Bryce was on quite a bit of drugs and alcohol when she. Is this something that she does often? And Rune says, yes, she has that crap in her system at least one night a week. Isaiah says, why? And Rune says she does what she. So there's a little bit of bitterness in there to suggest they have some sort of history, but at this point, we don't know what that history is. Rune does say to leave her alone, not to touch her, not to ask her back, anything like that, because she is his cousin, is all he. And then Rune leaves, and we get just a little bit more interaction between Isaiah and Hunt. That there is actually a tracking device in the water that Bryce drank when she was here, and that the time frame on it is 3 days, so that they'll be able to actually monitor her or track her for the next 3. Not that it really matters, because she spends the next week in a hotel room by herself with her mom, and does not leave the hotel room. I think it's interesting that there is a tracking device that they put in the water, so it's small enough that Bryce wasn't able to detect it. And as they're discussing it, Isaiah does mention that Hunt is known as the Shadow of, very similar to descriptions of Azrael. He's described as shadows, and they also talk about Danica being one of the strongest Vanir in the cities, even without making the drop. And yet she begged like a human in the end. So whatever this demon is, Hunt doesn't know what it is. He hasn't seen it before. He's not sure what kind of demon it is. He actually went to hunt it after he calmed Bryce down at the scene of the attack, but he wasn't able to find anything in regard. And he doesn't know any demon that kills, that cannot be traced, and it's almost as if it had vanished back to hell. We've had a couple mentions of hell throughout these set of chapters, and it is spelled with a capital H and only one L, and it is a definitive place in this world. So where we've talked about it in other worlds as not knowing what happens after life and death, other than there is the other world, Crescent City, there is an actual hell. And so that is where the demons most likely are coming from, hell, and then they're. So our very last chapter is a page and a half, so we'll touch on it real quick. Bryce, like I said, is in her hotel. They flew her mom in. She stays in the hotel with her mom for a good week because there's nothing in her apartment to go back to. It's completely torn apart, and it's an active crime scene. because of everything that happened, after Bryce agreed to go on a date with Connor, and then she still had some fun, still slept with somebody in the bathroom, all of that is in text messages between herself and those text messages have gotten out. We're going to figure that out a little bit later, but we start to get hints of it. So Ethan, Connor's younger brother, who was Bryce's, one of her best friends, he was like a brother to her, tells her he never wants to see her again, not to come to the sailing, which is essentially the funeral, Danica in the Pack of Devils the next day. And she doesn't listen to all of the voicemails or read all of the text messages from them because there are a lot and they're So she's been in this room for 6 days, but she does finally leave it on the 7th. And she only leaves it to go down to the Bone Gate on the steps of where a black boat is. She is the fee to be there. And she is there because she is attempting to do something as her last kind of gift to Danica. We don't know exactly right now what she is doing. All we know is that a creature that dwelt in the mist emerged, and even the river at her back. She opens her eyes to look at it, and the chapter. So we don't know for sure what she has done. But we do get a little information on what happens at a sailing, like the funeral of someone who dies here. And what happens is their body, or what's left of it, is put in a boat and it sails across the river. If it reaches the other side, which you can't see because it's shrouded in mist, if it reaches quarter on the other, the bone quarter sounds a lot like the bone carver, so it's hard for me to say the difference. But if the boat reaches the other side, the spirit or what is left of that person is welcomed into the bone quarter. However, if the boat tips, it signifies that that person was not worthy of getting to what we're presumably saying is the. So that is of the set of chapters. That was a long episode. Sorry, that was a ton of information, but that is all of part 1 for this. The next episode, we're going to jump into part 2, and it is actually taking place 22 months or almost 2 years after all of this. So we're going to discuss all of that. Questions, comments, concerns? What do you got for me? What else do you want to talk?
One thing, and it was just a small. I thought it was interesting when they were back in the apartment and everyone was giving her grief. So she went to her room and they were all laughing, and Connor growls to kind of set him. She specified that Danica's snarl was like death incarnate, soft and husky, and we've protected being described as death incarnate in, I think, both before. I know for a fact in a couple things Reese did, either the way he or the silence around him when there was darkness that was the safe darkness was described as death incarnate. It was that dark. I know there's been a few references, so I thought it was interesting. And again, my memory on the book is super, super shoddy, so I feel kind of rereading after 3 years, which is basically what I'm doing. I want to say with what Danica's part plays later on, it kind of, I don't want to necessarily say foreshadowing, but it caught me as interesting because you don't see dark described as husky. How Reese was described as welcoming in the darkness. So that kind of stood out for me with the difference of being that full of heat temper. So it was just the description, the just caught my attention. And literally put my bookmark in it and go back.
Yeah,
it out.
no, I did not pick that up. But yes, death incarnate is often described for Resand, and the phrasing is often paired with growls or snarls by the. So.
Not sure, like I said, if there's any tie with it, but.
And it is a discussion point for the fandom across all 3 books. This type of growling. I don't know that it's foreshadowing
Amy, we've talked about how there are some things that could just be how Sarah writes. The words she likes to use. It was so blatantly, because we've been paying so much more attention to it. And I think that was at the point I was in the car listening and I was like, okay, I am going to catch some stuff in the audio that I wouldn't catch reading. Because I read the chapter and I bypassed it. First time I put the audio on, it was there. So I just thought that's the only other thing that I had that you called out. You were thorough on this one. That's ridiculous.
That's why it took me all freaking day to get through all the chapters, because I had to pick everything out. And I'm still convinced.
I remember her making me laugh in my original.
That's all I'm going to say. Because I don't want to give it. I like Jessica. I think you can tell even through this book that she knows more than she knows more than she's lit. And it just makes you wonder what all she knows, like what's the extent of it. And Bryce has already mentioned that she reports to one person only, and that's the Umbra King, who's over the boat. So, like, what does she and the Umbra King know that they're not telling us? Which I'm sure is awesome. Okay, that is a wrap on our first official episode for Crescent City book, House of Earth. And I will remember the actual name of these books at some point. If there's one thing we already know, it's that Sarah J. Maas has dropped us into a world that's equal parts fascinating, confusing, and impossible to put down. So much information in that first set of. Whether you're reading along with us for the first time or you're revisiting Lunathian, we hope you'll join us as we unravel the mysteries, meet the characters, and inevitably become way too emotionally invested in all of it. Or at least. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss the next episode, because things are only going to get more intense from here. Until next time, happy reading, and remember, in Crescent City, nothing is as simple as it